Okay, we're recording.
Well, Jason, thanks for asking me in.
Pleasure, Coops, and for those who don't know, this is Henry Cooper, one of the absolute legends of Melbourne University Basketball Club. Coops, maybe if you want to kick off just by telling us who you are.
Well, yeah, probably just set the scene a bit, Jason, by saying that I was an active player in the club for 37 years. That might not be a record, but I don't know there'd be too many others around who would have exceeded that. It was a great 37 years all that time. So I joined in 73 and I was continuously active as a player, apart from injury timeouts, through to towards the end of 2009 on the Monday night when I was playing.
I actually recall starting out at the club, and you used to run some Friday night trainings where I'd come and get to put up shots with you.
Yeah, that's right. Some of the first then did come along and train with us for an extra run on the Friday nights. We were at that stage we were the older blokes in the club, so we used to sort of carry on the tradition of the Friday night training.
Yeah, I remember the old shooting from 5 spots, and I'd take 25 shots, and Coops would be like, nah, 25 makes.
Well, that's the only thing that good shooters don't remember their misses, Jason. I'm sure you can't remember missing very well. I'm sure you remember hitting.
Not a very good shooter, Coops.
But anyway, I just sort of again to establish where I sort of fit in the club through that time. If I joined in 73 and all that time, I reckon I played about 2,500 plus games, which seems like a lot, I suppose. But we used to play up to 3 times a week. Sunday nights, Monday nights, Wednesday night VBA. Plus we'd go away to tournaments. So I think when you add them all up, I reckon something over 2,500 games at that time, which is a fair whack.
Where were the Sunday and Monday nights?
Sunday nights, the club played at a couple of places. Played in the CYMS comp down at Albert Park, which I only occasionally played in. But for a number of years, we used to play at Collingwood. There was a comp there as we were sort of growing through the 80s. That required some extra spots for people to play in.
Where was the stadium?
It's in not far off Hoddle Street, part of the school.
Oh, we played there this season. Yeah, it's still there.
Yeah, and I mean, you remind me of things when you start to talk about that. The Collingwood was where I almost set a club record for scoring. We playing with a team with John Campbell, who was also a long time player in the club, and a very good player. We were chewing up the court, and come half time, I think I was up to 35 points for the first half, and I had visions of a 70-point game until I scored a basket in the second half, then twisted my ankle, so I finished with 37. So
it's possibly highest scoring single half.
Possibly, it's not the same table. Don't know if the halves really count though. You've got to really, I think, do the whole game. But anyway, back to 73. I think when I
is this the start?
This is the very start. My first year. My first interaction with the club at all was O Week in 1973. I walked upstairs in the Bow Repair, the old Bow Repair building next door, to the basketball club O Week table, because that was the one thing I was going to do in O Week, was join the basketball club. And that confused the people on the table because they were just up there to promote it. They didn't know what to do with someone who actually wanted to join the club. So at that stage they had some leftover t-shirts that had been printed from the previous years, which I bought one of those, so I've still got that, and I displayed it at the Alumni game earlier this year. I've still got the 1972 Melbourne University Basketball Club club t-shirt. And thereafter, I think we used to train Saturday mornings in the Bow Repair. My first training session would have also been pretty much the first session that Mel Speed, who had just taken on the role of head coach of the club, principally for coaching the men's first, but he came along then to what was the bottom half of the club. There were 2 parts of the club. There were those who played serious basketball, which were the first, seconds, possibly the thirds, I think. And then there were the rest of us would turn up on a Saturday.
This is the blokes, right?
Blokes only, yeah.
Blokes only?
That was only men's training, yes. There were women in the club in 73, I think. In 73 there were 6 men's teams, so three that were sort of serious and 3 that were social, if you like. And there were 3 women's teams. The men's first, seconds and thirds all played in Basketball Victoria, or the VABA competition in those days. In 73 it was the 2nd division, 3rd division and 4th division, I think we played. And then the others played Thursday night business houses, something like A or B grade and C grade, and in my case F grade. And that was good, at least I made it into a team. And the women would have only had 3 teams, I think, in 73, and I think they all played in the VABA competition only. So
when you say the VABA,
that's Basketball Victoria. Now it was then called the Victorian Amateur Basketball Association. In subsequent years, when Mel Speed was president, it changed its name to the Victorian Basketball Association because they wanted to be seen as professional, not amateur.
I remember I used to play in the Victorian Basketball Association, and that was the highest level outside the NBL.
And then it became, Basketball Victoria. So yes, but at that stage in 73, the men were playing Division 2. They had a pretty good year in that year in 73, and in 74 they went up to Division 1.
And how did that stack up in the Australian landscape?
Division 1 in 74 was the highest standard competition being played in Australia.
So Melbourne Uni was playing at the highest level?
We were playing at the highest standard. And in 74 we actually did win a few games. So
when you say we, you've jumped from F grade to the
No, when I say we the club, not we. No, at that stage it was still 2 parts of the club, and that part of the club that was the elite members, it operated quite separately really, even though it was all the one club. So I didn't know those players. Some of them I didn't know very well at that stage, got to know them better later on. But certainly, the club then could offer people competition at the highest standard available in Australia. In 74 that was, and in 75. In 74, I think I've mentioned to some others previously that 74 was also a year because, as well as playing first division in Victoria, we also managed to, by our dubious means, get entry into the Australian Club Championships. Now, in the late 60s, there was a competition called the South East Conference, which had a few teams from New South Wales, Victoria, Tasmania, South Australia.
Was this the old CBA?
It was a precursor to the
Continental
Yeah,
Basketball
it was called the
Association.
South East Conference.
Right.
But that died in the late 60s and in the early 70s, and so there wasn't really a lot of interstate competition, so the club championships were almost then, the pinnacle of the interstate competition between states.
This is prior to the National League.
Well before, which came like the 80s. So I think Melbourne University got into the competition because Mel Speed had contacts, and just immediately before the club championship was about to be played, 18 from somewhere pulled out, and Mel said University will fill that gap, and so we did. And we apparently there were 24. I thought there were more, but Mel says there were 24 teams in that particular tournament. Our first team was against an Adelaide side. He thinks possibly it was the West Adelaide Bearcats, but not certain. And we managed to have a close win over that team. And then by dint of the way the fixture went, we finished in the top half, which we didn't win any games after that, though we had apparently had a very close game against St Kilda, who were then a Victorian powerhouse team.
St Kilda Saints.
St Kilda Saints, yeah. Yep. But anyway, at the completion of the tournament, we were ranked 12th. So
Out of
24.
That's pretty good.
So I think it was astounding, really. I mean, that would probably be the highest standard.
That team that played in the Australian Club Championships finished 12th nationally. Did it comprise mostly of students, alumni, or just people who were...
It would have been nearly all alumni. Some of them, there may have still been some students in the team, but the men's first would have been people who had played and finished playing.
At Melbourne University?
Yes. At Melbourne University, there were a couple of players from interstate universities, because in those days, if you moved from interstate to another university, you probably went to join another university basketball club. So certainly Ray Watson, who had been a member of the Australian team back in the 60s.
Any relation to Ken Watson?
Son of Ken, son of Ken.
Did you say Australian team?
So he went to the 1968 Olympic team that was sent to Mexico, that included players like Lindsay Gaze and so on, and I think Ray would say his job was just to bring the ball up the court so Lindsay could score mostly, but I'm not sure if that's true. But so Ray would have been point guard in that 74 team. We also had a player from, I think he was out of Washington, the University of Washington, Bruce Solobach, who's now passed away, bless his soul. And Bruce was probably a 6'6", but he was big. I mean, he was a big 6'6" bloke. So he was our centre at the time, and the rest of the team would have been the usual suspects, guys who had been playing, but they were good. We just happened to have a good bunch of guys playing together at that stage.
Were you, like, who else was involved in that team? Do you remember? Did you go to the club championships to check it out?
Didn't know it was on until afterwards.
Okay.
It's interesting. I mean, one of the things that would be different in contrast now from then is that communication today is very, very different. I mean, to say if something happens, most people at the club can be easily made aware of it. In those days, I didn't even see the men's first play very frequently in the first couple of years. I would have watched more basketball in this stadium of the men's first after I finished playing than I ever watched when I first joined the club. So we just didn't promote ourselves internally to the club in those days.
When those names you drop are pretty incredible. I mean, Mel Speed would have been the head of basketball in Australia just about at some point, wouldn't he?
Yeah, Mel had quite a career in basketball. I mean, to say, I used to think there was a time that Mel's greatest achievement was teaching me to do a left-handed layup. But look, the good thing is he progressed from that. You know, he didn't sort of let that go to his head.
That didn't hold him back.
No, he went on. And he went on to become. He coached Melbourne University for about 3 years, 73, 74, 75. And he was then building up his own law practice at that stage, and he left for a while. And he came back, he'd been away for 2 or 3 years, I think. He came back as coach of the firsts and the seconds for, I think, just 1 year, when he was also seeking to establish himself. He wanted to take on the presidency of the Victorian Basketball Association, which he was elected to that role. Subsequently, he also became involved with the National Basketball League, which started back in the very late 70s or the early 80s. I think it started in the late 70s in Australia.
When the National Basketball League started in the late 70s, was it actually national or just Victorian?
It was a bit like the AFL.
The VFL.
It was, a lot of Victorian clubs, but it had a lot of interstate teams as well. And not all the Victorian clubs entered. I mean, Melbourne Tigers, for example, did not enter the National League in its first, 3 or 4 years or something. They stayed out of it. So anyway, Mel went on to become the president of the National Basketball League, which is a position of some influence, I guess. He was always keen on being in sports administration, and I know that subsequently he then sought a career in full-time sports administration with more than one sport before becoming successful in applying to become CEO of Cricket Australia. He did that job for a number of years. Then he applied to become CEO of the ICC, the world governing body for cricket. And again, he was successful in that, and he was in that role for some 7 years, I think, or 8 years, which I think meant he went to Dubai and worked out of Dubai to
Do you guys still put up shots together?
I haven't seen Mel. We keep a little bit of contact from email and so on, but I haven't seen Mel for quite a number of years. He looked extraordinarily happy after Richmond won. He was on, they tend to focus on him, he's a director of the Richmond Football Club now. In fact, he somewhat unfairly, I think he's been named when people talk about moves against the current president, his name gets mentioned.
So he's a bikie.
So I know he recently come out and said, I really appreciate that people didn't associate my name with moves against the president because and he's been a director on the Richmond Football Club for 6 or 7 years now.
What about this Ray Watson bloke? So we had an Olympian playing for Melbourne University Basketball.
Yeah, now Ray's background, I suppose, as you'd expect, being son of Ken, was that he would have played his junior basketball with the Melbourne Tigers. And like myself, he was a regular user of the Brunswick Barnards as a young man. But he would have done all of his Tigers, all of his junior basketball with the Melbourne Tigers. And then he left, he would, and including to the point when he was selected in the Olympic side in 1968 to go over to Mexico. And he had quite, it's interesting, he had some misgivings about that. I've talked to him about it subsequently, and he would say that given his time, he probably wouldn't have gone if he had his time again to go.
To play for the Boomers?
Yeah, it was interesting. In those days, funny things happened to people. He was an academic, and he'd been offered some kind of a research role with the CSIRO, a fellowship or something, or a cadetship or whatever. But it was contingent upon him being available and doing it. So that you either take this.
So he lost the gig because he.
So he lost the gig. He came back to Australia, and I think he then went down to Geelong and worked down at Geelong for a couple of years. Came back to Melbourne, and he was a statistics lecturer at Melbourne University for a long time. He only finished being active here on campus about 3 years ago. He was working in a consulting capacity. He used to sort of be the consultant to the consultant statisticians.
Must have been a pretty good basketball player though.
He was a pretty good basketball player. He would have been one of the, very difficult when you sort of say, I find people say who's the best you play for, and maybe Ray played with, or maybe he was, maybe he wasn't. Probably been the best few players that I've ever played with or been associated with. But anyway, when Ray sort of came back from the Olympics and then finally joined Melbourne University in the academic field and started playing with us, I think he started playing with Melbourne Uni in about 1971, and he would have then played through until possibly the start of '79 or thereabouts, when he went off to England on some kind of an academic thing. And I mean, the interesting thing is that Ray was actually coach of the men's first. He was the first coach to select me in the men's firsts.
When was that?
Back in 1976. I'd sort of gone from being F grade on Thursday night, my second year in the club. I got promoted to D grade, which was a bit, and then I think in the third year I was playing in the second, and then in the fourth year I got selected for the first time in the first. It was interesting because John Campbell and I, we made it into the first at the very same game, the first time either of us had been selected to play in the first, and headed off down to it was the Dandenong Showgrounds, which is in those days a long way out of town.
Is this for what league is this?
That would have been Division 2. When there was only at that stage it was very simple. Division 1 was the top league, Division 2 was second, and so on. There was no Premier League or Championship. It was just Division 1 was still the top league, so we were playing second level at that stage. And that game I remember because I'm sitting on the bench through the game thinking, God, I hope I don't have to go on. I'm just so nervous. And then someone fouled out with, like 2.5 minutes to go, and we were leading by 3 points or something of that nature, and I'm thinking, good pick, John, good pick, John. John's a much better ball handler than me, and he says, Hoops, come on. Oh, hang on. And I think the only thing I can recall is, someone threw me a pass at one stage, I think I caught it, and hopefully I didn't commit a turnover before getting into the ball again. But Ray was terrific, very supportive as a coach, so I played under him for a little bit for a few years, and then in 78, we were leading up to varsity, and I decided that I had a pretty high opinion of myself at that stage as a coach. I've been coaching a lot of teams in the club at a lower level, and thought I should coach into varsity this year. I've played one into varsity, I know what it's all about. So I sort of promoted myself to that, and Ray, who was coaching the men's first, says, that's great because I don't want to do it, but you can't just turn up to IB and be coach. So, starting next Wednesday, you'll be coaching the men's first in second division. Okay, fine, that's good by me. So, we coached each other sort of thing, and or played with each other over the years. So, I think that year in 78, the men's first finished in semi-finals against the Melbourne Tigers.
Out of curiosity, what were the other clubs that were playing in the second division at that time?
Well, we would have played, in that semi-final, we would have played the Melbourne Tigers,
yep,
coached by Ray's dad, Ken, and they thumped us, I think. But it would have been mostly just local suburban teams, so Box Hill, Nuttawading, Geelong might have well, Bulleen. The names change over the years, but it's the association representative.
I don't recall Box Hill having a club.
Box Hill were Nuttawading's part of Nuttawading Association, and they had previously been a first division team that got demoted. St Kilda, of course, were playing first and second division.
At this time, you got first division, second division. Were there any Americans running around in these leagues?
Yes, yeah, they were. Well, Bruce Sollerback, who played for us, would have been like so many other Americans who first played out here. They came out as teachers. Back in the late 60s and the early 70s, Melbourne or Australia went on a bit of a recruiting drive. Victoria for teachers from overseas. And so a number of them that came out here as teachers, obviously they had basketball skills way in advance of what local players had, even though they didn't consider themselves to be very good. But there would have been very big names in those days: Gary Fox, Steve Connolly, Dean Martin, who really wasn't just a singer, was a player, George Wilson.
At that time, you've stayed involved with basketball from then right up until now, and you came along to our alumni night this season. You've seen some NBL games recently. How would you compare the standard of play from that era, Division 1 basketball in Victoria, compared to what you see today? Was there a representative?
Look, this could be interesting. At the very best, we weren't nearly as good as the very best today in lots of different ways. Just recall, this would be late in the 70s, I think, when decent teams would come to Australia. By decent teams, I mean US college teams or European teams would come to Australia. They generally play a series of games against Australia, and we'd hopefully be competitive with the US college team, not one of the top US college teams, but we'd hope to be competitive with the second tier US college teams or some of the European teams. And I think that I recall one Thursday night in the 70s, I've been playing out on the back court, and Australia was playing a team called Locomotiva on court 1. Now they were
Is this Albert Park? Or?
Yes, at the old Albert Park Stadium.
Yep.
And they were either from Yugoslavia or Czechoslovakia, I can't recall which. But
Ryan Brokoff was playing there, wasn't he?
One of the countries that doesn't exist has broken down now. But anyway, Locomotive were out here, and if you snuck in from the back court, you might get to watch without paying the $1.50 or whatever you had to pay to. But as I walked onto court one, someone, Henry, can you give us a hand on the bench for this game? And that just sort of indicate the difference. I mean, to say this is Australia playing, and because I knew a few people there, they said, we need someone to help out on the score bench. So I watched the game, but I was in charge of the four.
I thought you got to call up to the bench, Henry. I thought you were going to get to
not the
catch the ball, get to take the winning shot.
No, I sat there, and I can remember it was a bit tense because we always, in Australia, we worry about the Europeans and their hot-bloodedness in those days, but the only thing that caused me a great deal of stress, I can recall one of their guys taking 2 foul shots at one stage, and he made the first one, and inadvertently, I added 2 points, and the score bench was pretty basic in those days, very hard to take a point off, so I'm sitting there praying like hell that he makes the second one, and he did, so that we were back to level pegging. So different standards, but the very best that existed back then, also at Albert Park, I think another anecdote was Eddie Palabinskas, who was
free throw guy.
He was absolutely one of the best basketballers ever, one of the best shooters ever come out of Australia. In 2 Olympics, Eddie Palabinskas was the leading scorer at the Olympic Games. But he'd come back, was in I think before the 76 games, so it would have been early 76 or thereabouts. He'd been playing overseas, and he came back to play with played in Victorian Division 1 to make himself eligible for.
This is the bloke who now coaches Shaq and all those guys on his free throws.
Now.
No, he's a free throw coach. Yeah.
Well, anyway, the interesting bit was I'm down watching him play for St Kilda.
Yeah.
One night on the old court one, and I think most people watching would have missed this, but he comes up, he's got 2 shots, and he lines up and he goes, ka-tunk, and the first one just drops straight in. He lines up with the second one, ka-tunk, left hand, just drops straight in.
Yeah.
And he was a freak. He was just fantastic. I mean, so at the best, we were certainly very, very good. But now there's a lot more very good players. There's a lot more. I mean, I think when I first started playing the men's first, I would have known when we went to play anyone that was a decent team, I would have known who the good players were. I would have known every good player in Melbourne back in the 70s. If I turned up to a tournament in those days or a game and there was someone good that I didn't know, where did he come from? It's like, but now there are so many good players around that I think that's the difference now. There's more big players, there's more good players.
Do you reckon? I mean, obviously, people who are playing professionally now have probably put a lot more training into it and practice hours along the way. I'm guessing it's very professional from a young age.
Oh yeah.
But do you reckon many of the guys who were running around at the top level in Australia at that time, back then, would get a gig in the NBL these days with their skill level being what it was?
Some of them would, yes. Some of them would certainly. They'd have to do a lot more strength and fitness work. I mean, to say, I think in the 70s, some coaches started introducing like a second training session a week, and it wasn't until the NBL started getting serious and they had American coaches out here that had 5 days a week training sort of started to come into, but once a week training would have been pretty common for even first division sides back in those days. Yeah. It's one of the things that was big, very, very big when I joined the club, and not in my first couple of years, but country tournaments.
They're still very involved with country tournaments. Melbourne Uni will always send a team to Albury, Ballarat and Warrnambool.
Well, Albury I went to a couple of times. Ballarat I went to a couple of times. Warrnambool was very big. I mean, prior to National League, the Warrnambool tournament, the Swan Hill tournament.
So I've heard about the Swan Hill tournament. It doesn't run anymore, but apparently it used to be quite big.
Well, there are a couple of things about the Swan Hill tournament I could recall. Generally, it was run at New Year. You'd have quite commonly the very best South Australian Victorian and sometimes New South Wales teams would come to Swan Hill. So you might go to Swan Hill and see a grand final between West Adelaide Bearcats or Sturt and Melbourne Tigers or something like that. It was, that's where you'd see more great basketball in a short space of time at the country tournaments than you'd ever would have seen in Melbourne, sort of once a week basis. But
is it a big stadium?
in those days it was 4 courts, which I think it still is. 3 of them inside. Court 4 was a concrete court outside. Now, I'm not saying we were tough, no roof, but when it was plus 40 degrees on a concrete court, out the back, court 4 was feared by all if you went up there. That tournament was where, I think back to big names in basketball then. Phil Smythe, who was like Australian point guard for many years. The general, who was, I think somebody once said to me, well, yes, Andrew Gaze really is Australia's most recognised basketballer internationally, but Phil Smythe is our most respected basketballer. Phil Smythe was, he was my idol as a point guard. I met him up at at the showgrounds. We always used to camp at the showgrounds at Swan Hill. Met him up there when he'd just come back from playing college ball in the States. He was over. Him and his brother was a good basketballer with I don't know, Sturt or Woodville, one of the South Australian teams, and chat to him, and he started talking to him. I thought, bloody hell, he's got an American accent, which he lost subsequently. But you'd meet people like that. I remember one Swan Hill tournament, Denny Morceau, who was a St Kilda player from Queensland, fantastic, wonderful basketballer.
Uncle of Anthony Mundine?
It could well be related to him. And we're up at the tournament anyway, at the showgrounds, and I was standing there talking to somebody, and this bloke walks up to me, started talking a bit, and he said, "Bloke's got a beer?" And I said, "No, we just waited someone to come back from the pub," and he goes off, and minutes later he's back with 3 cans, one for him and one for each of us, and that's Danny Morceau. This is a guy who's going to be like an absolute star.
Did he make the national team?
Absolutely. Oh yes, he was. And then
he was a boomer, wasn't he?
Yep, he was a boomer. Hurt his knee at a game at Albert Park one night and never really recovered properly from that. But
was he good?
He was beautiful to watch. He was just He was such a humble person, such a nice bloke, and fluid movement, athletic. If you can imagine a leaner version of Lucas Walker and more mobile, and similar sort of height in jump. And I remember, Dan Morceau saying to me, it was Brian Curl that found me when I was living up in Queensland, and when Curly found me, I couldn't dunk, I couldn't do anything, and but fantastic. And Swan Hill, we would occasionally overestimate our ability, and
we being Melbourne
University.
Yep.
And we did this at a few tournaments. We'd enter the top grade in those days after post 75 when our good players had gone. But we did play A grade up at Swan Hill 1 or 2 years, so that it led to John Campbell getting his photo on the front page of the fixture one year. Photo from the previous year. There's a picture of John Campbell. He's looking up as Cal Bruton's making a layup over the top of him. It'll be quite to get kicked to pieces.
Who else was running around for you guys? What, Cal Bruton? Far out. Did you have Skippy or?
It would have been, yes. It would have been. Skippy would have been playing. Les Walker would have been playing. Might have been Graham Jane. Would have just started playing. Who was. We used to think we were a fairly good side. I used to be able to run a bit in those days. John Campbell could pass a bit, so we could.
Did you have any height?
Not really. Well, we had height that we thought. We had Les Walker and Graham Jane.
What constituted height those days?
Anyone over 6 foot, probably, and a jump.
Out of curiosity, these days, you can't play big unless you're a lot bigger than that.
Yeah, you've got to be big and strong these days. I think Les, who was our big man, Les Walker was our big man in second division most of the time that I was playing. he was probably only 6'3".
Is that because just in general bigger guys didn't play basketball?
There weren't as many big guys around. I mean, to say, in nowadays,
Better nutrition?
every kid who's 14 is as big as his dad. It's not. I mean, in those days, there weren't as many big people. Six footers, you know, were big people. Leslie was only 6'3". He used to. I can remember 1978. Training for InterVarsity, Les used to go onto a side ring and he used to do standing, you know, two-handed dunks, like 6 in a row, then rest and just power straight up, two-handed dunk. And he used to do that over and over and over again. And then so, you know, very athletic and a very big jump. And back to the country tournaments. Warrnambool was a bit like Swan Hill. Warrnambool was in Australia Day. It used to be a weekend, of course, before.
Still is.
It's back to being a weekend.
Yeah.
So it was
Australia Day weekend.
a three-day tournament.
Yep.
And again, you get the South Australian teams would come over for that, with the best of the Victorian teams will be up there. We played A grade 1 year up there. I think that would have been in '79. You know, we talked our way into A grade. We sort of said, oh look, you know, we finished 4th in 2nd division last year, and we won the Australian Universities Championships. We're good enough to play A grade, and we got kicked all over the place in that tournament. But that was you know, it was what we could do. We try and play the higher level grades we could.
You guys got a national championship at InterVarsity?
Yeah, look, in my time we had the men. The women also had some, but the men had 2 in '78. When I was coaching, and we beat Adelaide University in overtime in the final in a you know, a very tense game.
What year was that?
That was in '78.
What was university games like back then? Was there a crowd watching, or was it a small
Just
scale
people
affair?
attended, because in those days they weren't university games. It was basketball InterVarsity, the way it should be.
What's the difference?
Only proper universities went. It was before every tertiary institute in Australia became a university, basically. And in those days there were just 16 universities in Australia, so it was really perfect for InterVarsity. If they all attended, there were, you know, 2 pools of 8, and you'd play 7 games, which mean 1 or 2 games, 1 or 2 days you play 2 games, and then you play finals at the end of it. And '78 was probably the greatest game I was ever involved in at Melbourne University. Not the grand final, which was terrific, even, you know, it was overtime against, but in '78 we just had our 2nd division team, and the subs were guys from our 3rd division side. Myself as coach, no one from outside Will.
Is this IV?
InterVarsity.
Yep.
In Canberra. And the game, the semi-final that year was against Monash. Monash, who had guns from St Kilda, had Gary Voss, Neville Beard. You know, they had top-class basketballers, to the extent that I think it was VBA finals during InterVarsity week, and Gary Voss, who was the centre for St Kilda then, went on to become a footballer, I think. Centre for St Kilda, they flew in from Canberra back to Melbourne to play the Wednesday night game, and then back to Canberra on the Thursday morning, and we had semi-finals Thursday night. But some things happen that you remember with great clarity. And the start of that game, I said to Ray Watson, your job at the start of this game is you've got to impose yourself on Neville, so that after 2 or 3 minutes he thinks, I'm not as good as the person playing on me. And that was as much to G Ray up as to sort of make that happen. But the centre tip went just according to Hoyle. Les was good, but Gary Voss was very good, and he out-jumped Les easily. Won the tip down to Neville Beer from Monash. Neville turned and he started to dribble into offence. The ball went down and it never came back. Ray picked it off the floor and was off for a fast break layup. had it, what's the tip, and they were just, I can recall that event. Maybe I'm recalling a recollection rather than the actual event, but that was the moment. It was actually fantastic. This could go on for a while. I'm thinking of other things that might be of some.
So we've talked a fair bit about the 70s there.
Yeah.
But your association with the club extended through.
Well, the 80s was probably I coached mostly through the 80s, not continuously. And actually, probably one of another person I will mention, who won't get much mention from a lot of people, is a chap called David Zaborowski, who you can say if the right people get to watch this, I can say, Lindsay, if you ever watch this, I thank you for getting me sacked as Med's head coach. And generally through that period, if we had a coach and I was playing, we didn't, then often I was coaching. And in 1980, I was coaching. And I think I just received full support of the board, which is not a good sign ever. But then about a week after that, this Soviet chap turned up, could hardly speak English, and he came in and he said, Lindsay Gay, so you need coach. Okay, well, I'm the coach, mate. Oh, Lindsay Gay, so you need coach. Anyway, so I floated off to John Campbell or something, I think. You can talk to this bloke. And a week later, I got a message from the committee that Kirk should have been released from coaching duty, which was okay. And so hence David Zaborowski, and he really couldn't speak English. So I stayed on as like assistant coach / interpreter for him, because coaches don't need to speak the same language. I could speak his language and I could talk to the team. But David's background was he'd actually been coach of Kiev in the Soviet National League, which is this is serious. But he was a Ukrainian Jew, so he got out of the Soviet Union to Israel for a couple of years, then came to Australia and took on coaching us at the end of the 80s. And one of the best coaches, if not the best coach I ever played under. I played under Ray Watson, who was very good. But David was very different to me as a coach, very different ideas. But he and I just communicated terrifically. That's one of the things that you'll find, people find the best time you've ever had as a player was when you and your coach really clicked together. Anyway, David came along and that sort of released me. I went back to playing in the seconds, but then I got picked back to playing in the first and still worked between him and I remember about his second training session along. We used to try and run the shuffle those days. Probably,
still do to an extent, yeah.
Yeah, well, we used to run to an extent as well, never very well. Remember the second session, David said to me, what, this one you call this turnover you do? What's this turnover one you do? And I said, oh, that's the offense, we do this. And I tried to explain the shuffle to him. Finish. No more. Now, each one boy must decide for himself. And that was it. And that was all gone. It was different philosophy, but I knew what he meant. He's like, there's no more structure. Mm-hmm. Do these things, and he was terrific. We had at that stage also playing in.
How'd that go for you?
Sorry.
How'd that go for you guys?
He coached us to an Ed Varsity wing in '81. He also took on coaching the women. He coached them up from 3rd division to 2nd division, and I think we sacked him for not doing the job properly or something. But he was IB coach in 1981 and took us to a win. And it's funny, a story about how people see each other. We had playing in the team before he joined us was a guy called Neville Brayley, who was a Coburg junior, who had joined us, and Neville's terrific basketballer, again, wonderful person, and used to love playing with him. But after about 3 or 4 weeks, David came to me and he said, Henry, you must tell this one boy Neville, finish. No more. Oh, Neville, you want me to tell Neville? no, this is, my stat sheet, Neville got 19 rebounds last week. And David says to me, he's too much man. I do. And he says, no, you're not touch. I know touch. I know can coach. And I thought, I know what he means. But, and I thought, how am I going to tell Neville this?
So what does he mean?
Well, we want Neville out the team.
On what basis?
Because he's saying, I do this. Neville says, no, touch me. I can't touch a player. I can't coach a player.
So he's not.
So he must go. And what do? And the next day, I'm at work, phone goes, and it's Neville. Jesus, what do I tell Neville? And Neville says, Coops, I don't think I can play for David. Could you tell him that I'm not going to stick around? Sure, Neville, I'll be pleased to let you know on your behalf. And I just thought it was amazing. Neville's one of the greatest players and great basketballers I've ever played for. David's one of the great coaches, and they both independently arrived at this conclusion that they couldn't be in the same team. Good thing they both chose me, is sort of to tell the other person that they had to go. It was, but anyway, David was one of those people that just come out of the blue and did a terrific job with us for a couple of years. But he went off. He coached. I think he became coach of the Coburg women. They were playing National League in those days, and so on. We lost him. He went elsewhere. So yes. So the 80s, I was mostly coaching through there. I coached most of the IVs through that time, but not all of them. I think the decade started with John Campbell as coach, and there were 3 IVs I didn't go to. We had a couple of bad years. In 84, we had a disappointing loss when I had some things I was going to do, and in a critical game, I just did the wrong thing towards the end of the game. There's a player I should have had off the court, should have a different mix, and we ended up losing a crucial game by a point or something like that. That was hosted by Latrobe down here, so very disappointing finish when we had a reasonable team. Might not have won it, but we could have gone a lot further. The next year, 85, we were hosting IV, but because Latrobe had the Melbourne the year before, we decided we'd hold InterVarsity up in Swan Hill, which was terrific. Worked really well, isolated out there, and all the universities still, caught trams, train buses, whatever, up to Swan Hill, and flooded out the hotels. Melbourne University booked out the Oasis Hotel, and again we did better than expected. The men, the women did much better. They won, but the men coming again to a critical game. It was an early morning game, 9 o'clock in the morning against ANU. So I got the team out of bed, as it were, early.
Well, that's of interest. I mean, uni games now is taken pretty seriously for the sport, but almost just as seriously for the social element.
Yeah, well, that was a big thing then. Yeah.
So, how social were uni games back then? Like, were people...
Look, there were you could generalise and say it was one big social event, but that's not true. There were a lot of people who took it very seriously, would have avoided, looked after their diet, their rest, and everything during the whole of the week.
Right.
And that would have been. Most of the Melbourne guys would have taken it seriously. No
getting on the Terps.
Some would have, absolutely. Some would have written themselves off on the first night. That was, we didn't have curfews. You had to be ready to play the next day regardless of what you'd done the night before. And some people sort of made a thing of partying.
What was your view on that?
I thought if you were ready to, you had to make a decision about what you could do and be ready to play the next day. If you were ready to play the next morning, then you could do it. When I was playing IVs, I would have never drunk very much. I would have probably not drunk at all the night before or during the tournament. When I was coaching, even though I was told I shouldn't, I would. I used to be an anchor of the boat race team. when I was coach, 78 was big, not for winning IV, but also the fact we won the boat races. But anyway, back to...
Young people these days may not know what a boat race is.
There's no need to tell them. Back to 85, at Swan Hill, we had that early morning game, and I got the guys up to try to get them ready, and then everyone's got to be down at the stadium like 20 to 9 or something, don't be there too early. And I left it at that, but half of them went back to bed. 10 to 9, you know, we had a crucial game, 10 to 9. Players are still walking into the game, into the stadium to get ready for the game, and we lost this push time or something like that. So I thought, I should have kept them up. I should have walked them all to the stadium together or something. And so I had two tournaments in a row where things didn't go well. So in '86 and '87, I didn't coach. Mel Short and Rick Bristol.
Was there maybe a Fiji thing in between there somewhere?
1984, some entrepreneur ran a tournament called the South Pacific University Sports Championship, and it was just private enterprise work, and he invited a lot of universities to send sports teams over, basketball, netball, hockey. You know, there's a raft of different sports went over. We sent over a basketball team.
I recall seeing a photo of my dad's old boss, David Little, I think it was.
David Little?
Yeah, big fella.
David Little wouldn't have gone to Fiji. He would have, no. David Little was a club member later.
Okay.
He might have post-84, I think, but he didn't venture to Fiji with us. So photos you've seen of David, who was very active in all facets of the club for a number of years, probably would have been.
Big fella. Precise point. How's Fiji anyway? Did you go?
Fiji was probably the most fun tournament I've been in my life. You know, Fiji's a very good place. Great weather for drinking beer. So we drank a lot of beer. We had a lot of fun, and Fijians Fiji was an interesting place then. It was sort of like cultural tensions evident between even in those days between the Indians and the Fijians, and subsequently, of course, the Fijians have sort of, you know, some of the Fijians took matters in their own hands to sort of reclaim their own country from the Indians as they saw it. But all the commerce, you know, if you went to shops over there, the commerce was all Indians ran all the shops and so on, and the markets were probably Fijians, you know, the wooden trestle tables and the grass skirts and all that sort of stuff with the
What was
Fijians.
the basketball stadium like?
They had a two-course stadium. They had a which is their national sports centre. So it's a multi-purpose stadium, but they had you know, that was used for basketball and volleyball and a couple of other sports they indoor, but it was terrific. We stayed at the University of Fiji, in Suva, at what you know, the equivalent of our colleges here. Pretty basic accommodation though, because these were built, I think, during World War II as military accommodation. And if you've ever been to Fiji, that part of the world, cockroaches thrive. When I say thrive, I mean thrive. You know, you get into bed and pull everything up off the floor at night time because you hear them running around. Put your foot out of bed during the night, you probably tread on cockroaches. But it was, who cares? You just, the cockroaches will probably go and have a couple more beers.
Yeah.
So it was a great tournament. We ended up losing the final to the University of Queensland. I think they
They were more acclimatised than taking it.
That may well have been the case, but it was a really terrific week over there. And the 80s, yeah.
That's the basketball side of things, the 70s and the 80s. What was outside of the basketball, what was Melbourne University Basketball Club all about during that time?
Well, outside of basketball, well, I don't know really, I suppose. I was more focused. Basketball was a big part of the basketball club for me. And I'd say some of the things that I did during the 70s and 80s was change our focus more to basketball. For example, when I joined the club, the welcoming event was a wine and cheese night here in this sports centre. So people who hadn't drunk very much before come along and got sick on very cheap red wine and not very much food and so on. And so by the time we got sort of the latter part of the 70s, early part of the 80s, I managed to get rid of that, and we had a commencement tournament, you know, and so it was basketball. we used to have things like tennis days, God knows why, car rallies. So I put my focus on just making the basketball club more about basketball. There'd be a lot of other social
Trivia
events.
nights and Christmas parties and things like that.
That sort of things would certainly, the social part of the club existed for all of the time that I was there, but it wasn't the overwhelming part of the club. I mean, there were times in the 80s that I used to follow the actual Latrobe Uni Basketball Club social circuit because Melbourne was a bit quiet in that regard. But in terms of social interaction, I mean to say, I think you go back from the early 70s all the way through, I don't think much would have changed. That you make, people make lifelong friends in the club. They meet their soulmate. There'll be a lot of couples who would have met in the basketball club. I mean to say, some people do marry outside the club, but by and large, I think a lot of people meet and meet their soulmate within the club. And a lot of my friends, that I've stayed with friends with from that time, we go bushwalking or something now. There'll be Tony and Pauline, or there'll be Les and Julie, there'll be Chris and Woody. They're all Graham and Sheena. They're all people that I played with, and we were part of the club at the time. And there were some of the things that made us very close was the tournament accommodation arrangements in those days. I mean to say, when we first started going to tournaments, it was always a tent.
Right, so camping.
It was just one big marquee.
Right.
Which, if you really jammed people in,
was that a cost thing, or was that just
well, A, there wouldn't have been
a social thing, or
it would have been both. It would have been cost, and it would have been doubtful if there would have been sufficient accommodation available in those places to actually have everyone stay, in hotels or motels or something like that. That was gone by the early 80s, the mid 80s, but certainly by the part of the 70s. Everyone stayed we shared the one tent, and I mean, there's nothing like sleeping together. You're sort of the last person.
How many people's in this tent?
You could, if we jam packed it, you could put 23.
Was this a club tent?
Yeah, this was a club tent.
Okay.
And in fact, I was just tracking down where that club tent went, because I was a custodian of the club tent for a long time. I used to sort of take it away on tournaments. But apparently it finished up as the sandpit liner for one of David Morrisoli, who was club president at some stage. It ended up as the sandpit liner for one of his sons a few decades ago.
That's brilliant. I'm just.
In fact, one of my early memories of the club tent was first we went in '76 to the first ever Southwest Classic, which was the Portland tournament.
Oh, the Portland tournament, yeah, Warrnambool, yeah.
I've still have the first Southwest Classic fixture, which is just a little A4 fold over thing printed with the teams on it. But anyway, '76 was the first year we headed off to that, and I was the custodian of the club tent. My 57 hold, and there was some doubt about whether it would get there, and so Jeff Stamp, who had a more modern vehicle, but it was small, the Morris Mini, the genuine original Morris Mini in those days, we agreed that he would drive down. But the night before we're heading off, he contacts me. Well, I don't remember how, because we didn't have a phone in that share house I lived in those days, but he contacts me and he says, "Coops, I've just had a look at the map." I said, "Yeah." "It's a bloody long way to Portland." I said, "Oh, how far?" He said, "I reckon it'll take 5 hours to get there." And I said, "Shit, our first game's at 9 o'clock in the morning." So, like 4:30 the next morning or something, he's around in North Fitzroy, we've loaded the tent into the rear of his Mini Minor. Which is a sad thing, because all the way to Portland we could see the tops of the trees on the side of the road, because he was driving around and pointing up in the air. We couldn't see the road in front of us. But we got there.
Just doing a mono the whole way.
It was, we got there. But Portland would have been sort of like, the Portland tournaments over the years would have been a good example of how things changed, because after a couple of years we would have booked out Max Hotel, and a couple of years in a row we booked out the total Max Hotel, stayed there, and the pub would close at 10 or 11, whatever it would close at those days, and then the stretcher was the barman would say, "I'm going now, don't damage anything, and you guys can have the jukebox in the downstairs." You would have access to the grog, you'd have to have your own drinks beforehand, but you just closed it all up and have a party area with the jukebox and so on. It was fantastic, and once people discovered staying in hotels and motels, I think the pub tent got less and less demand with the passing of time, and organisation was just I think improved, and people started booking accommodation, and it was terrific. And then the 80s finished, and the 90s come along, and by the end of the 80s and the 90s, and I was becoming less involved with the club and more involved with Victorian basketball as such. I think about 87, I moved on to the board of the old Park Stadium, and when Mel Speed was the chairman of that, he was, among other things, he was chairman of the stadium down there. And I think he probably enticed me to come on board because he wanted to leave, and so 2 years later I took over as chairman of that. I oversaw the demise, I'm the person who oversaw the demise of the other stadium eventually. Through that time, through a lot of the 80s and into the early 90s, well into the 90s, I've been the Melbourne University rep to the now Basketball Victoria General Council, secretary of what was called the minor divisions, the committee that used to run everything bar the Division 1 and the old ODA, and all of that sort of associated with, and the co-op, as it was then called, which was the group that used to run the other stadium. We shifted focus when I was running that. We shifted focus onto building stadiums in Victoria. So I had a 10-year period then through most of the 90s where I was still involved with clubs, still playing.
Which stadiums were you involved with advocating for in Victoria?
We built quite a few. We built a 4-court stadium in Altona, which you probably played at. We extended.
Played there this season.
Yeah. Okay. We had a fire. We used to run the Coburg Stadium, which was a 3-court stadium. That burnt down. We rebuilt as a 4-court stadium.
I used to play there too.
Mill Park, we built a 4-court stadium out there on the grounds of the Mill Park Secondary College near the shopping centre. Out at Ringwood, we were associated with, but didn't actually do the building of the Ringwood Canterbury Road, I think it is, next to the golf course out there. So we managed that for 5 or 10 years. Something after we built it, we did that in association with the council. We built a stadium, a 3-court stadium out at Bellarine Secondary College down the other side of Geelong. Hampton Park Secondary College, we built a 3-court stadium there. Up at Ballarat, we did a 2-court extension at the Arch Sports, at the Arch.
The Mine Dome?
Not the Minor Dome, no. There's a school near, if you drive up it's called the Arch Centre. There's an arch.
These aren't the concrete courts, are they?
No, we wouldn't have done concrete, no. So
Maybe
we had a 2-court centre there. So around Melbourne, a few of the country. Traralgon, we ran the Traralgon Stadium for a number of years, and in association with the Commonwealth Games being held there, we had an extra couple of courts built on there. So I meant to some weeks I could be going to meetings. Luckily I worked at a company in those days that had an office in Morwell, so I could often schedule things. So I'd have funnily enough, I had an event I had to go to in Morwell, and then I'd go to a.
Where did the money come from for these stadiums?
So there was some. It varied. Some of it was seed capital from associations. So, for example, down at Altona, the CYMS Basketball Association, I think it was, provided CYMS or might have been Metro and Southern Districts Basketball Association Tuesday night provided some support to what had been the Yarraville Basketball Association. They renamed themselves the Altona Bay Basketball Association. They provided some seed capital, $60,000,
Probably been a chunk of cash back
That was a fair chunk.
This is a Metro competition that's still run Tuesday nights.
Yeah, that's
at
correct.
namesake.
That's the same competition, yes.
Oh, wow.
Yeah, it's Metro and Southern Districts. I'll tell you, they're two associations.
Where did they get that cash? Like, is that
Just accumulated over
taking
years
some
of
of the
running
loans
the competition. So that and down at Altona, we did that 50-50 with the Netball Association. They put up a like amount. The local council loaned us $200,000, I think, and we borrowed the ANZ Bank debt department. We borrowed $800,000 or something from the ANZ Bank. So mostly that was debt financed.
Yeah.
When Coburg burnt down, we used the insurance money from that. We figured because we were doing some changes at Coburg, it would take us a while to get approval to do what we wanted to do at Coburg, because there was people didn't want a bigger stadium built there. So yeah, that's great. Well, there are local residents objected. Not all the local residents were supportive of it. So what we did there was we actually took that money, or some of it, and we used that as seed capital to build the Mill Park Stadium. Again, the rest was debt financed. And then we still had some left over to rebuild the Coburg, with the remainder being financed again by borrowings. So we had a lot of debt finance.
How does that debt all get paid off?
Operation of the stadium.
Oh, you reckon they're clear by now?
Well, the Altona one, for example, which is the first one, we borrowed nearly $1.2 million to do that. We paid that off, and plus we've gone into debt again to do the 2-court extension. It's a 6-court stadium now, so probably if we pay off what we owe on that, then another couple of years we'll look to extend that again. That's the only stadium I currently still have involved with. All the others, you know, I did my time. But, you know, I think that was late 80s, so 20, 25 years or something we were involved there. When I first started, I thought stadium building, this is a long-term commitment. I have to do at least 10 years. So 25 years later.
Back to the basketball club. During the 70s and the 80s, what was the total membership base like for Melbourne Uni basketball?
Well, in the early 70s, as I said, when I joined, the club had 6 men's teams. Some of those teams would have had players who played like two nights, but probably 40 men maybe. The women had 3 teams, so probably 20 or 30 women of that sort of build would have been the numbers. And I think whatever you've got now, you could probably just do a linear, extrapolation between then and now. It just steadily grew.
Yeah.
I mean, there were times when it took a bit of a step up, and when we moved from having just the bow repair court, which is one court only for the whole club, or all the indoor sports clubs, basically, to having the 2 courts here. We then had the bow repair remained as a basketball court for us. We had 3 courts there, and all 3 courts were used from time to time, so that gave us some capacity to expand.
When did this stadium get built?
The sports centre was built well before my time, so it would have been sometime in the 60s, I would have thought, but it was only a single-storey building.
Right.
It was always constructed with the capacity to have an extra floor on top. And then when Cheryl McKenna, who was an ex-basketball club member, was president of the sports centre, and John Campbell was also involved at that stage, they did a thing called the air hall. So they had like a blow-up tent on top of where we are now. And there were 2 courts, I think, inside that, inside a plastic dome, and it was kept erect by air pressure. So you had to walk in through airlocks, and he just pumped air into it, and it lasted for several years until I think it blew away. And then the permanent structure was put on top of here, and 2 full-size courts. And we would have been the last university in Melbourne to get these sort of facilities. I think back when I first arrived, Latrobe had 2 indoor courts, full-size collar courts. Monash had 3 indoor courts, and we had the elbow repair. And used to
So you reckon by the end of the 80s there would have been 100 people in the club?
Yeah, probably by the 80s, I would think, yeah, we would easily pass 100 during the 80s. I think during the 80s there was quite a big growth then, and I don't have a feel for numbers except at that time that was the decade that we sort of entered into Coburg, and we entered other competitions just because the number of players was too great for us to cater for everyone who wanted to play in those regular competitions. And I think the other thing was probably, and I'm thinking of the interview I watched with Norm and Keith Nichols, and you asked them about whether they played then left. I think there was also a great number of us stayed around the club, so probably in 75, when Melbourne University fell out of First Division, there was an exodus, you know, and there were a whole bunch of us then came along at the end of 75, start of 76, and sort of we didn't know too much about how to run a club or anything, but we sort of had to take over because everything had been focused upon the men's first pretty much prior to that. You know, like the women's coach sort of he got paid all the money we had to coach the women, but it was Bruce Sollyback who was centre for the men's first, so everything was sort of based around the men's first, and then people sort of left, and I think thereafter, as well as there being an increase of interest, meaning more people came along, people like John Campbell, like me, like Jeff Bolts, a whole bunch of people who just, it was great to stick around and keep playing. You know, to the point I said, if I stuck around until 2009 with a lot of those guys, you know, so we not only were we building numbers, we were you know, we had all these old people sticking around to keep playing. And you know, basketball goes on. I still play today, and the guys I play with are mostly from sort of like probably a decade after I started. There's not many of us in the over 60 categories that still play regularly. But
how old are you now, Coach?
I'm 62.
Pretty good shape for a 62-year-old mate.
Everything works except suboptimal amount of cartilage in one knee, but that's okay. So yeah. Those people stuck around, the new ones come along, and this is Tuesday night competition, which I think university, I see university teams down there.
We have a few girls teams.
Yeah. So as I wandered down towards F grade, which is, you know, where I first started with F grade, I wandered down towards F grade.
You're back there again.
I'm back, but the problem is now we've got to be careful if we get relegated. You know, this team Skywalkers that mostly ex-Melbourne Uni people, you know. I used to be able to play A grade on Tuesday nights, and that doesn't seem like that long ago, but it's probably 15 years ago, I suppose. Now we've toured the whole stadium as we've worked our way down to F grade, but the next relegation is badminton. It's next door. I think there's nowhere further to go, so we can't afford to get relegated down.
You're gonna have to do some recruiting.
Yeah, but it's good to see the university guys, you know, so the university guys they're not as university, but the guys that I met and started playing with, and in fact, David Crombie, who sort of joined the club in the late 70s.
He's my dad's old boss.
There you go.
Yeah.
Well, I played with David, and I played with David's son, John. And John's our big man on a Tuesday night. Yeah, well, David and I played together for a long time, but he's, you know, except when he was out in Australia, he sort of worked overseas for quite a few years. And David, you know, we play Masters tournaments, but generally I coach him now. He's a junior, he plays in the over 50s or the over 55s.
I still see him running around at CYMS on Sunday nights.
That's correct, yes. Yeah, David, when he's not out injured, you know, he's just come back from recovering from a strain. But David is. David's great. David's a very good basketball. David would have been like a seconds player and maybe a fringe fill-in player on the first from time to time.
I recall playing with him once.
Sorry guys,
That's okay.
I had to grab
Yep.
your balls.
No worries.
We'll have intermission while you're doing that.
And
Sorry mate.
Thanks. And so, what about during the 90s? Did you have any involvement with the club at that time, or were you too busy with the administration?
Look, I think I would have been, my main involvement in the 90s would have been representing Melbourne Uni on the VBA General Council, which is the peak body for policy formation for basketball in Victoria. I still would have been playing and coaching to some extent, probably just maybe once or twice a week, which would cut down to twice a week or something like that. But by and large, I was sort of gradually moving out of it and just taking a playing role. And I still would have been involved in some things like functions and I'd have to look back and see who won awards or something to work out what year I last went to an annual dinner quite some time ago. I would have thought. I don't know how long the Henry Cooper Award has been around. But
on that, we've got a couple of awards that would be interesting to know a little bit more about. We've got our most prestigious award in the club being the John Bayliss Award, which gets awarded annually.
I think I got that. I was awarded the John Bayliss in '77.
Right, and it probably wasn't around for a whole long time before that.
It was was supposedly a person who was a bit like me, really, someone who at that stage, when I was awarded, I was told that I was very much like John Bayliss, and that I certainly wasn't a good basketballer at that stage, but I was involved in almost all facets of the club in terms of committee and administering and running things, in coaching, helping out and coaching teams, organising teams, and playing at a reasonable level, but not a top level. And I didn't know John, but a couple of years prior.
Do you know when he was around?
It would have been certainly either the late 60s or the very early 70s, probably the later part of the 60s. I think it was about 3 or 4 years before I joined the club that he passed away. I understand that it was in a car accident, either travelling to or from the Swan Hill tournament, and it was deemed that he was exactly the sort of person that makes clubs really great clubs. Just people who do basic stuff like you want someone to coach a team at a tournament, yeah, I'll do that. You need someone to do the score bench for a game, yeah, I'll do that. You need someone to organise some stuff for a party this weekend, yeah, I'll do that. You need a general rep committee, yeah, I'll do that. So he was just, I understand he was just a person who would, invaluable. People who are invaluable to making a club worth belonging to, and so it's John Bayliss. In all my time, it was certainly the highest award that we could give.
It still is. It still is. Yeah, but we do have the other award, which is extremely prestigious, that we continue to award annually, and that's the Henry Cooper Award, and we award that to our most promising first-year player.
Yeah.
And I'd be interested to know, how did that award come about?
Well, I think you'd probably blame John Campbell for that. He in fact, was the second award that was named after me. He tried to initiate a pre-intervarsity match between the best of the rest and the IB team, and called that the Henry Cooper Trophy. But that didn't last very long, because it wasn't really a game that was played every year. And then I think he was the person who came up with this, and that on the basis of that was that I've spent a lot of time coaching in the club. From the mid-70s through to the mid-80s, probably for 10, 11, 12 years, from about 75, I think, from about my third year in the club, through for at least the next 10 years. Then I would have coached everyone in we had 2 tiers in the club, then the top group and the rest. And so if you weren't playing in the first or the seconds, then you went to Henry's training on a Saturday morning. So during that period, I would have run the training sessions for all those guys, coached a lot of their teams during their league competition. On tournaments, I would quite often coach 2, 3, 4 teams at a tournament. People would say to you that was only because I liked collecting medals when they won, and that would be just untrue. It was was the goodness of my heart and my soul feeling for the players. I would have done. I didn't coach the women a lot. I would have often coached women's teams on tournament, and I used to fill in coaching for the first or the seconds if the regular coach couldn't coach the women. But I wasn't all that sensitive as a coach, and I had trouble because I sometimes made girls cry when I coached.
Don't we all?
But then I regularly coached women's teams down at Collingwood, when we had teams there in that period. And it was probably because I suppose that award came out to say, well, what I think the club really makes a good club is to have people who are willing to coach, and I would have regularly told people during those years that, you know, if you want coaches to coach, and you need to just show some appreciation, just say thanks after they've coached you or something like that, because coaching at a high level, like the first, it's one of the most emotionally draining things you can do. When I finished coaching the men's first, I remember a couple of years later the guys saying, you know, oh, won't you come back and coach? It's just for a tournament or something. And saying, I can't, you know. It has great moments, but during the tough times, it's quite soul destroying as well when you have near misses and bad times. So I think it was just the fact that I'd pushed the fact that, you know, people who are good to coach really are one of the reasons that people will coach, and having coaches makes the club. And I think John decided that's a pretty good reason to have that award, and I think he promoted that.
That actually jumps the memory. I wasn't quite spot on with the best first. It's actually a coach's award that can be awarded to anyone.
Yeah, it used to be the most coachable player.
Most coachable player, yeah. Yep, it still is. It still is.
Yeah. So that's how that came about.
Nice.
I think I'm just about out of anecdotes now. There's a heap more, which generally I think when we had the alumni night here, we sat around over at the Clyde afterwards, which was really terrific. You know, such memories just sort of flood back over the years. The club room sign was brought out. You know, all those nights after training, when we used to go back to Bowles' place. You know, the club rooms was wherever Jeff Bowles was living at the time, and
that's where that sign was, right?
And in those days, Jeffrey was way ahead of the pack in so far as if you had the right contacts or the right subscription, you could get NBA games used to be flown out on VHS tape, and so we could watch NBA games, you know, like 2 weeks after they'd been played in Australia. And it was so we'd go back and watch basketball the days when Larry Bird and Dr. J and those guys were the absolute. You know, if you had the Celtics versus the Sixers or something like that on a replay on a Friday night, it used to be the absolute highlights to watch that sort of basketball in those days. Absolutely fantastic.
You mentioned the alumni night that we had here this year, and it was such a sensational thing to be a part of. We're actually looking to try and do another one next year for all the people who didn't get a chance this year, and then we'll see how we go in terms of whether we make it a little bit more rare.
I think you should approach it on the basis of use it as a fundraiser. I think it's people are more than happy to come along and do something in the way of financially supporting the club, and I think we could probably, with a bit of effort, get even a few more people along. Last year, there's a number of Melbourne Uni alumni who I contacted. I obviously don't have all their names, addresses, or contact details, but there are a number of them out there, and some of them people who are ex-politicians and so on that have gone on to do other things that I contacted them at the time, and I'm thinking, you know, there's people that I think we could get along who didn't come last time, who would come to future events.
It was a bit of a testing the waters this year, but if anyone's watching, hopefully we'll put the feelers out and turn next year's event into a a real thing.
Well, what I'd say if anyone's watching is, Jason, can you turn on two terrific games? I mean, just like this, these were two absolutely fantastic games of basketball that night, and I'm sure that anyone from the past, when I say, when was the last time you got kicked out of the Clyde at closing time,
That was us.
that'll ring a bell when they're around telling us, you don't have to go home, but you can't stay here. And it was a really fantastic night. The basketball was terrific, and catching up with people was terrific. The talking over a beer afterwards was really great. It was everybody that turned up that night was so pleased they did. And I think you can maybe tie it in with other events. I think looking ahead, I spent a lot of time waxing on about 78 IV. In 2018, it'll be the 40th anniversary of that IV win, and it's a good reason for me to try and get all the guys from the 78 IV team back together again. So there's always look back in history a few decades and see if there are particular events. People in 2017 next year they probably think 2007 was a long time ago. So have a look back at what happened in 2007 and reunion of teams that year, or people who joined that year or left that year.
We'll take this offline. We got plenty to talk about, but we're definitely looking to drum the next event up and make it a big one. It'd be really special if anyone who's thinking about it makes the decision to come along. It'll be good. We promise.
Yeah, well, certainly. Well, if you come along, you'll have a great night. I think I'm done.
Well, thank you so much for tonight, Coops. That was really fantastic to hear about all that history stuff I had no idea about, and I'm sure there's plenty of people out there that have no idea about a lot of that stuff too.
Well, Jason, I'll look forward to looking at the condensed version when you've taken all the crap out, because I'm sure it'll go for much too long otherwise.